I am the first memory. To leave a home is to die a small death. Edgehaven believes they have cast a girl to the jaws of a monster. They are wrong. They have only returned a key to its lock. Most fear the silence of the wood, but Kaelin is learning a different truth. Out here, a wolf might kill you, but it will not hate you. The journey of the outcast is over, and the song of the forest has begun. If you have missed the first chapters of The Forest, return to the beginning now. You must see the fire before you can face the thorns. For the rest of you, the trees are listening. This is Chapter 3, The Threshold of Thorns.
Sleep proved a stranger. Kaelin spent the night watching the shadows in her cottage lengthen and shrink as the moon traced its lonely arc across the sky. In the pre-dawn hush, the world was a palette of cold gray. It was the kind of flat, lifeless light that precedes a dawn you wish would never come. She moved through the single room with limbs that felt distant and disconnected. There was no panic or frantic rush. The shock of the previous night had settled into a heavy ache in her bones. It was a silence so profound it had swallowed all other feelings. She felt like a ghost in her own life, performing the last rites for a future that had died in the fire. Her fingers, usually so deft and sure, were unresponsive as she packed a small, worn satchel. She found herself watching her own hands to ensure they picked up the right objects, as if they were tools belonging to someone else. Each motion was automatic, a hollow echo of purpose. She packed a water skin filled from the rain barrel and a small, sharp knife used for pruning herbs. Its wooden handle was worn smooth by years of her own work. There was nothing else. When stripped down to what she could carry, her life was a pitifully small collection of things. Every object she touched was a memory. Each was a phantom limb of a life now being amputated. Her hand drifted over the cracked leather cover of her mother's book of plant lore. For a moment, she could almost feel the warmth of the hands that had held it so many times before. She ran her thumb along the worn curve of a garden trowel leaning against the wall. It felt like saying goodbye to old friends. These were inert objects now, cold to her touch, but they were the only proof she had that her quiet life had ever existed at all. A soft creak from the door made her flinch. Her heart seized. She expected an angry villager or a guard sent to hurry her departure. But the figure who slipped inside was small and stooped. The woman carried a tiny lantern. Its flickering flame cast long, warm shadows that pushed back the cold gray of the room. Alara, Kaelin breathed. The name was a knot of relief and sorrow in her throat. The old woman moved with a quiet urgency. Her bright, magpie eyes took in the packed satchel and the desolation written across Kaelin's face. Alara didn't waste time with pity. She came forward and pressed a small, tightly wrapped oilcloth bundle into Kaelin's hands. It smelled of dried moss and pungent herbs. "For the path ahead," Alara said. Her voice was a low, steady rasp. "Crushed yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, and a bit of dried honey cake for strength. The forest provides, Kaelin, but it rarely provides what you need at the moment you need it." Kaelin could only nod. Her throat was a tight knot of unspoken goodbyes. Alara's gaze dropped to the dark wood spiral resting against Kaelin's collarbone. "Trust that," she said, her voice finally softening. "It will not lead you astray. That wood remembers the way, even if your mind does not." She reached out. Her hand was as wrinkled as a dried apple as she cupped Kaelin's cheek. "Listen to me, child. Do not let their fear become your own. Do not let their smallness shrink your heart. Edgehaven banished a girl today, but the Elderbranch is waiting for a guardian." The words were a spark in the hollow darkness of Kaelin's grief. A guardian. The idea was so vast and so impossible that a dry, humorless laugh almost escaped her lips. She looked down at her own trembling hands. "I don't know how," she whispered. "You will learn," Alara said with unshakable certainty. She pulled Kaelin into a fierce, bony hug. It was not a soft embrace. It was a hug that tried to impart a lifetime of strength and stubborn defiance in a few short seconds. "I would walk with you if these old bones would carry me," she rasped, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely showed. "But this is a path you must walk alone. Go now, before the sun is truly up. Be brave, Kaelin, and be worthy of the song in your blood." With a final look that carried more weight than words, Alara vanished into the pre-dawn shadows. She left behind only the scent of herbs and the lingering warmth of her presence. Kaelin stood for a long moment, the oilcloth bundle clutched in her hand. The hollowness inside her remained, but a tiny defiant flame now flickered within it. Ilara's words, her mother's necklace, the weight of a legacy she was only just beginning to understand. A wet nose nudged her hand. Rowan had been a silent observer of the exchange. He rested his heavy head on her knee, his one good eye fixed on her face. Kaelin sank to the floor and buried her face in the thick fur of his neck. Her body finally surrendered to a single, shuddering, tearless sob. He was the only one left. As the first fragile fingers of dawn light touched the gray sky, tinting the edges of the clouds a bruised purple, she knew her time was up. She stood, her movements stiff, taking a deep, steadying breath. She took one last look around the small, sparse room. She saw the empty stool by the fire, the worn patch on the floor where she slept. On the table, the moon petal still glowed faintly in its bowl, a testament to her crime and her gift. She walked to the heavy plank door and lifted the iron bar from its bracket. The sound was a loud, final thud in the morning stillness. She pulled the door open. A draft of cool, damp air rushed in to meet her. Her first instinct was to pull it shut, sealing the memory of this room away from the world that had rejected her. But then another thought took root. It was a thought as small and sharp as a thorn. No. Instead of shutting it tight, she deliberately left the door ajar. "This is still my home," she thought. A spark of defiance flared in the hollow ache of her chest. "You can banish me, but you cannot erase me." With her satchel over her shoulder and the precious bundle from Ilara secured inside, Kaelin stepped out of her cottage for the last time. Rowan remained a silent, steadfast presence at her side. She did not look back. The main path leading out of Edgehaven was a ribbon of pale, hard-packed dirt, etched into the landscape by generations of footsteps. This morning, Kaelin's were the only ones upon it. She walked with her head held high, a small, desperate act of pride in the face of utter humiliation. Rowan trotted silently at her side, a dark, loyal shadow in the early dawn. His presence was a comfort, but it did little to ward off the oppressive feeling of being watched. The village was still wrapped in the slumber of early morning, the windows of the cottages dark and shuttered. Yet, Kaelin could feel the weight of 100 unseen eyes. She imagined the villagers in their beds, listening for the sound of her departure. She pictured them peering through the cracks in their shutters, their faces grim with the satisfaction of a problem solved. Every house she passed felt like a silent judgment. Every closed door was a final rejection. The silence was heavier and more condemning than the shouts of the night before. Then the sounds began, each one a sharp twist of a knife in her heart. There was the first ragged crow of a rooster, a sound she would never wake to again. Then came the distant, rhythmic clang of the forge, a pulse that had been the backdrop to her entire life. Now, that rhythm was no longer hers. Even the low, mournful moo of a cow from the dairy felt like a goodbye. These were the mundane sounds of a life she was now forbidden from. the heartbeat of a world that had cut her out like a diseased root. Her gaze stayed fixed on the point where the path met the forest. Looking back at the tended fields or the rooftops of her home was a risk she couldn't take. To do so would invite a wave of grief so vast it might pull her under. Instead, she focused on her movement. One foot in front of the other, a metronome of loss. The last marker of Edgehaven's territory was a crooked fence post, weathered gray by years of sun and rain. It was the unofficial boundary between the world of men and the world of the forest. As Kaelin's worn leather boots passed it, something inside her shifted. It was a feeling so unexpected it made her halt for a single stunned heartbeat. Mingled with the profound, aching grief was a startling, clean sliver of relief. For as long as she could remember, her life had been lived under constant, crushing pressure. The villagers' fear had been a yardstick against which she had to measure every word and every action. With that single step past the fence post, the immense weight evaporated from her shoulders. The air felt lighter. Her lungs seemed to expand more fully in her chest. The fear of what lay ahead in the Elderbranch was a vast and terrifying ocean. But it was a clean fear. This was an honest, primal fear of fang, frost, and starvation. Dangers that would test her body while leaving her soul untouched. It was a clean fear, free from the slow, creeping poison of the village's shame. Out here, she thought with startling clarity, a wolf might kill me, but it will not hate me. The path ahead was terrifying, but for the first time in her life, it was entirely, unequivocally hers. No one would judge her footsteps in the wild. Kaelin stopped at the edge of the wood. The Elderbranch was more than a collection of trees. It loomed before her as a single, breathing entity, a great, dark green ocean, ancient and watchful. No gentle slope offered entry. There was only a sudden, tangled wall of bramble and blackthorn, whose branches twisted together to form a dark archway. Faded ribbons and small, carved charms hung from the lowest branches. These were offerings left by hunters or fools who had dared to step beyond the safety of the fields. The canopy was so thick that the morning light barely penetrated the leaves, creating a wall of deep and mysterious shade. At this threshold, the air itself changed. The familiar sense of wood smoke and livestock gave way to something wilder and richer. It smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and wet stone. It was the scent of a deep life that was utterly indifferent to human concerns. Kaelin stood at the threshold of two worlds. Behind her, Edgehaven was already fading into a ghost of whispers and closed doors. Ahead, the forest stood as a vault of secrets, holding the truth of her parents' fate and the weight of her own name. A deep breath filled her lungs with the wild scent of the wood. Kaelin made her choice. Her first step left the villagers' hard-packed path for the soft, yielding moss of the forest floor. The ground seemed to sigh under her weight, as if accepting her presence. The journey of the outcast was over. The journey into the wild had begun. Her second step was blocked by a low-hanging branch of blackthorn. It was heavy with sharp spines and snagged with a villager's faded prayer ribbon. Before she could duck under the barrier, a sudden, soundless breeze rustled that single branch. The air remained motionless against her skin, yet the wood lifted away to clear her path. It settled back into place behind her like a closing gate. Logic named it the wind. Instinct called it a greeting. The border was more than a line on a map. It was a wall Kaelin could feel. One moment, the familiar sounds of Edgehaven were at her back. The next, she passed through the living gate of Thorns, and the world fell silent. Every trace of the village was swallowed by a silence so profound it felt like a living presence. The air grew cool and damp. It carried the heavy, rich perfume of 1,000 years of growth and decay. Above her, the dense canopy filtered the morning light into deep green shadows, and shifting, luminous shafts of gold. Kaelin felt as though she were sinking into the depths of a vast emerald sea. The forest floor was a soft, forgiving carpet of moss and damp earth that swallowed Kaelin's footsteps. Rowan had trotted dutifully on the hard-packed dirt of the village paths, but here he moved with a new and predatory grace. Alertness radiated from his every muscle. His nose twitched constantly, and his ears swiveled to catch noises Kaelin couldn't hear. He was no longer a village stray. He was a creature of the wild, and he was home. Kaelin stopped, straining to listen. She realized the familiar sounds of her old life had been replaced. In place of the smith's hammer came the dry, rustling skitter of something unseen in the undergrowth. Instead of a cow's lowing, there was the high, piercing call of a bird she could not name. Beneath it all, an ancient oak groaned as it settled its weight, a sound like a giant stirring in its sleep. The forest was not silent. It spoke in a language she did not understand, where every syllable felt vast and complex. And it was watching her. The sensation was so pervasive that Kaelin froze. Her heart thumped a heavy rhythm against her ribs. She scanned the impenetrable walls of green, searching for a hidden predator or a pair of glinting eyes, but she found nothing. This was not the sharp focus of a single creature stalking its prey. It was something far larger. Every tree, every stone, and every shadow acted as an eye. All of them were turned upon her. The watchfulness was utterly different from the judgmental stares of the villagers. Edgehaven's gazes had been hot with fear and sharp with a need to find blame. This sensation was something else entirely. It was not hostile, nor was it welcoming. The presence was ancient and impartial. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath as it assessed her passage through its domain. It was the gaze of a slumbering god that had just opened one eye to see who dared to walk across its floor. Kaelin walked on. Her path was guided by a faint, intuitive pull in her chest, rather than her sight. The sensation emanated from her mother's necklace, a subtle warmth against her skin that grew stronger when she faced one direction and cooler when she turned away. It was a compass guided by a forgotten memory. She had no choice but to trust it. With every step deeper into the woods, her thoughts swirled in a confusing torrent of fear and hope. Was she walking toward her doom, as the villagers believed? Was she a blight, a piece of unnatural chaos being drawn back into the wild sickness that had spawned her? Fear was a cold weight in her stomach. Every snapping twig sounded like a pursuing footstep. Every shadow resembled a waiting monster. But then Alara's words would surface, a small point of light in the darkness. A heritage, not a curse. The forest is waiting for a guardian. Perhaps the forest was not judging her. Perhaps it was waiting for her. The hope was a fragile, terrifying thing, almost more painful than the fear, because it felt so easily crushed. She was caught between two powerful currents. One was a lifetime of ingrained fear that named her a monster trespassing in a dangerous world. The other was a seedling of hope that whispered she might be something else entirely. She might be a key, returning to the lock it was made for. Her fingers clutched the wooden spiral. Its smooth surface was a tangible link to a past she couldn't remember and a future she couldn't imagine. Lost, banished, and utterly alone, save for the dog at her side, Kaelin walked on. She was a solitary question mark, moving through the heart of a great, breathing mystery. Hours stretched and distorted, marked only by the shifting angle of light through the high canopy. The trees had grown into ancient, gnarled giants with trunks wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Their bark was a thick, furrowed hide of moss and time. Every recognizable landmark had vanished. There were no trails here and no signs of woodcutters. No human had set foot in this part of the Elderbranch for a century or more. Kaelin was adrift in a world she did not know. As the sun's warmth vanished, a chill snaked up her spine. Exhaustion, a dull ache only moments before, now pulled at her like a lead weight. Terror sharpened the simple logic of survival. She needed shelter. She needed fire. The unseen rustling in the undergrowth, which had seemed merely mysterious in the daylight, now sounded like the stalking tread of a predator. Kaelin's heart fluttered, like a trapped bird against her ribs. She stopped, sucking in short, sharp gasps of air that failed to reach her lungs. Her eyes darted into the deepening gloom, twisting every shadow into a waiting monster. "Fool," she whispered to the silence. "You are a fool to have come so far." Rowan saw it first. He let out a low, soft whine of curiosity and nudged Kaelin's hand with his nose. She followed his line of sight, the panic caught in her throat. On the trunk of an ancient oak, a patch of moss had begun to glow. It was not a reflection or a trick of the fading light. It was a soft, efflorescent radiance of an impossible emerald green. The light pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic beat, the pace of a sleeping heartbeat. It cast a small pool of light onto the darkening forest floor. As Kaelin stared, another patch of moss, a dozen paces ahead, began to glow. Then another beyond that. These were not random growths. They were lanterns lit for her. They formed an undeniable path through the deepening gloom. The forest was not abandoning her to the night. It was lighting her way. Fear did not vanish, but it was joined by a hesitant wonder, strong enough to quell the rising panic. With Rowan trotting confidently ahead, Kaelin followed the glowing trail. The tangled, thorny undergrowth began to thin. The trees grew taller and more skeletal as a dampness clung to the air. The path led them down into a sunken, misty basin where the very air seemed to hold its breath. Soon, Kaelin found herself walking along a stark line of contrast. To her right, the forest grew dense and forbidding. The trees were dark giants with bark like wrinkled iron and thorny undergrowth that clawed at the air. Rowan's hackles rose. He shied away from that side, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The air drifting from those woods was cool and heavy. It carried a stern, watchful silence that made the hair on Kaelin's arms stand up. To her left, the woods seemed to sing. The trees were lighter and more graceful. Through their leaves, she caught impossible glimpses of color and light. The air that breathed from this side was warm and sweet, thick with 1,000 unnamed perfumes. Rowan's tail gave a single, hesitant wag. His ears perked up at the distant melody of birdsong and the gentle hum of unseen, joyful things. A realization struck Kaelin with a jolt. She was walking a tightrope between two different worlds. The dark woods to her right felt like Edgehaven, a fortress of judgment where every cold gaze marked her as a trespasser. The singing woods to her left resembled a festival she wasn't invited to, a paradise of life and warmth that reminded her only of what she could never have. One would cast her out, the other would ignore her. Both left her utterly alone. The hum inside her chest, that strange and private compass, urged her onward along this stark border. She pushed through a final thicket of grasping briars belonging to the stern woods, while Rowan darted nimbly around them. They passed a curtain of sweet-smelling, flowering vines reaching out from the joyful side. Then Kaelin saw it. It was barely a trail, more a suggestion of one, but it was undeniably there. A narrow track of dark, packed earth lay flanked by ancient, moss-eaten stones. The path ran straight into the forest. A silent truce kept the warring natures of the wood from overwhelming it. This path was a place of undisturbed peace. A strange sense of recognition washed over her. This path felt right. It was a road for outcasts. Rowan stepped onto the track without hesitation before turning to look back at her. His tail gave a short, decisive wag. He was ready. As Kaelin took her first step onto the track, The air shifted through the high canopy. It was a collective exhalation from the ancient trees. A sound was woven into the wind. It was the same humming melody she had heard from her cottage window, the thrumming lullaby that had called to her from the edge of the woods. It was no longer a distant echo. It was here, all around her. It was a song of deep roots and old stone, of starlight on still water, and of endless cycles of decay and rebirth. It was the soul of the forest, and it was singing the secret. Humming warmth in Kaelin's own blood surged in response. This was not a call and answer. It was a harmony, a small stream finding its way home to a great ancient river. She stopped and closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. The melody swirled closer. The breeze brushed against her ear like a physical touch, a whisper meant for her alone. Woven into the heart of the hum, so faint she almost thought she imagined it, a single note formed her name, Kaelin. Her eyes snapped open. She stood on a clear path in the heart of a darkening, living forest. She was a stranger in a land without a map. Yet, as the song washed through her, a sensation so powerful it made her knees weak took hold. It was a deep, resonant warmth. It was the feeling of her own roots sinking deep into the accepting earth. Tears welled in her eyes. It was the feeling of finally, truly, coming home. The forest was not just a place. It was a presence. And it knew she was there.
She has crossed the threshold. The village is now a ghost of whispers, and the forest is a mother. Kaelin has found her harmony in the deep wood, but in the world of men, the silence is growing loud. In our next chronicle, we return to the hollow dawn of Edgehaven. While Kaelin sinks her roots into the wild, a boy named Rorik was learning that silence is not a shield, it is a poison. The gray rot is moving faster now that its only enemy has been cast out. The village is dying, and the shadows are hungry for the truth. Do not follow her into the dark unprepared. At the foundation of this record, I have left a way for you to find your guardian and a collector pack for the journey. Claim them now, before the light fails. I remain the first memory. Watch the shadows, for they are watching you.